Hunger has a way of making even silence feel heavy, as if the walls themselves groan under its weight. That evening in a clay house with crumbling edges, a mother sat holding her small daughter, staring down into a single wooden bowl. In it lay the last portion of cassava porridge, thin, pale, and barely enough to feed even the child. This was no ordinary meal. It was their last. The girl whimpered softly in her mother's arms, her stomach empty for too long, her fragile body already trembling under the weight of hunger. The mother lifted the spoon, ready to give everything to her daughter, when suddenly, at that exact moment, a shadow crossed the doorway. A man stood there, bare and thin as an exhausted branch. His face was gray with dust, his clothes torn, and in his eyes there was the unmistakable animal look of starvation. He didn't need to beg aloud. His hollow cheeks and trembling hands spoke enough. The woman's heart clenched. She looked at her daughter, who whimpered with faint hunger, and then looked at the stranger who seemed as desperate as they were. To keep one alive, another would sink further. And yet, she did the unthinkable. With the same knife she used to slice her vegetables on better days, she cut that meager porridge in half for her child, half for the starving stranger. For herself? Nothing. The man took the bowl without a word. He ate quickly, humbly, his eyes darting like a stray dog's, and then he left. No thanks, no blessing, only silence trailing his steps. She watched him disappear through the dusty path, and then returned to her daughter, who ate what little remained in the bowl. By nightfall the child slept with something in her belly, but the mother lay down with none. She fell asleep empty, unaware that her silent sacrifice, made with no witnesses, was planting a seed that would one day bloom and change her destiny. The next morning, the sun itself seemed reluctant to rise. Its rays crawled slowly, hesitant to shine upon that forgotten hut where hunger still lingered like a spirit. The clay walls had cracked further in the night's damp, and all that remained from yesterday's fire were pale ashes, incapable of giving warmth. Yet inside the woman's chest there was a strange calm, not of comfort, but of stubborn dignity, the peace of someone who can lose everything but never surrender her soul. Her body woke before her child's did. Her belly cursed and moaned, but she ignored it as she had done countless times before. Crossing the small kitchen corner, she stopped by the wooden bowl. Gone was the porridge. What remained was only a hardened crust on the bottom, clinging to the wood like dry memory. She ran her fingers across the traces, almost without thinking, lifted them to her lips as if to gather one last taste of the past, and then wiped her hands carefully on the dishcloth that hung by the door. It was the end of food, but not the end of her story. Outside, life went on as always. The neighbors' chickens scratched noisily in the dirt, unaware of her emptiness. Men bustled to the fields, women fetched water, children played with sticks in the mud. The whole world moved normally, while inside her clay walls time felt broken, suspended. She turned her gaze to her daughter, the child sleeping softly on the ragged bedding, unaware that today not even sugar water was waiting for her. The mother dropped to her knees. She didn't lift her voice in a loud prayer, nor did she beg for miracles of gold. Her lips formed a single word, fragile but full of weight: Lord. Then she added, almost inaudible, not for me, for her. It wasn't hunger that spoke. It was motherhood, the prayer of a heart breaking but refusing to bend. Not for her belly, but for the tiny stomach pressed against her chest. No eye saw, no ear heard, neighbors didn't glance in. No curious child ran off to share her act with others. The sharing from the night before had been swallowed by the earth itself, as if even nature knew how to keep dignity hidden. There were no audiences, no applause, no witnesses, but the whisper of the wind that slipped through the crack of her door, like an unseen friend standing by. And yet something in the air of that home had shifted. What cannot be seen by eyes can still be felt in the soul. She rinsed the bowl as if it were still precious, scrubbing it with a few grains of sand, pouring water carefully, making sure it was clean. It wasn't about food. It was about preserving the last piece of respect she had. Then, sitting on the doorstep with her broom of dry branches resting nearby, she let her eyes drift across the dust of the path. She thought of the stranger, his eyes filled with the same hollow hunger. She wondered if he had found shelter, if he was still wandering barefoot like so many forgotten souls. Somewhere deep within her emptiness, her thoughts blessed him. Her little girl's weak cry broke her reflection. The hunger was no longer sharp, it became dull, an emptiness that ached silently. She held her daughter close, kissed her fine hair, and whispered a promise she didn't know how to keep. Today, Mama will find a way. You'll see. The child believed, for children always do. But the mother's voice caught in her own throat, tasting of unshed tears. She had nothing, Not grain, not fruit, not even a piece of root from the yard. What she had left was faith. That stubborn old kind of faith village women carried like an invisible tool. One born of being denied everything else by life. And so, alone, she swept her yard with that broom of twigs while hunger circled her like a stray dog. A neighbor leaned over the thorn fence of her big brick house, arms folded, sharp tongue ready. "I heard you had a visitor yesterday." The woman smirked, all teeth and malice. "A beggar, wasn't it? Already hungry yourself, and you give your food away?" She chuckled low. "Better to save it for your girl than waste it on strangers." The mother didn't bite back. She simply lowered her eyes to the dirt. Silence, she knew, carried more dignity than barking back at those who never understood compassion. Her heart trembled, her eyes grew wet, not from shame but from sorrow. Sorrow at seeing such dryness of soul, such poverty of heart disguised under words of wisdom. Later in the day, while the mocking neighbor gossiped again, boasting of her full pantry, the woman bowed once more to the ground inside her house, this time with her daughter kneeling beside her. They didn't ask for riches. They gave thanks. Thanks for breath, for love between them, for integrity no tongue could steal. That night, though their bellies growled, the child drifted to sleep in her mother's arms, certain of one thing: that home, though broken and bare, was still built of love. By dawn, another day had pushed itself onto the horizon, carrying only clouds and hunger. The drizzle of the night had given nothing but mud. Inside her house, the mother sat on the edge of the low bed, her daughter sleeping against her lap. There were no more places left to search, no scraps tucked away, no roots hidden to pull. Her tears had already been shed too often. Now there was only weight. Her body heavy, her soul heavier still. She stroked the girl's thin face and whispered with a cracked voice, "Today, once again, we'll manage, my flower." Then her stomach twisted in pain, growling with the fierce emptiness of a wolf. Her head wavered. Hunger clouded her mind like gray fog. Her stomach growled, and her thoughts felt clouded. Still, she got up, tied a scarf around her head, and began sweeping the floor as if preparing the space for something new, even without knowing if it would come. Then she heard the sound of a cart approaching, slow, dragging like the echo of another time returning. She thought it might be a vendor or perhaps someone looking for a favor. But when she stepped to the door and looked out, her heart seemed to stop. It was him, the man with the bowl, the same one who 2 days earlier had appeared there hungry, dirty, desolate. But now he was a different man, clean, wearing a pressed shirt, sturdy boots on his feet, hair combed neatly back. His gaze, however, was the same, deep, silent, grateful. He stepped down from the cart without hurry, carrying a large sack over his shoulder. He walked up to her and set it beside her without a word. Then he pulled from his pocket a thick envelope tied with a piece of sisal string and placed it in her hands. His eyes once again said everything. And then for the first time he spoke. "This is for someone who knows what it is to share." She froze, didn't know whether to take it, refuse it, or cry. Her daughter, now awake, stared wide-eyed as if watching a story come to life. Thaman didn't wait for a reply. He simply touched her shoulder lightly and returned to the cart. He climbed aboard, gave a small nod, and left as if his mission had been fulfilled. With trembling hands, she opened the sack. There was flour, rice, beans, oil, salt, soap, things she hadn't seen in her home for weeks. And inside the envelope, along with a few crumpled bills, was a small folded sheet of paper with only one handwritten sentence. The kindness, no, one saw heaven recorded. She sat down on the floor. She didn't cry out loud, but her eyes brimmed. Her daughter ran to the sack, grabbed a handful of beans, and held it up like a jewel. "Mama, we're going to cook." She smiled. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the taste of hope in her mouth. But more than the food, more than the envelope, it was the gesture that touched her. Not for what it brought, but for what it meant. It was as if the world had turned its gaze toward her for a moment. As if someone above had whispered, "I saw what you did." So, neighbor, of course, saw it all from her window. She narrowed her eyes, trying to make sense of it, but she didn't come down. Didn't say a word. Maybe out of pride. Maybe out of shame. Maybe because she didn't know how to react to something that can't be bought or fabricated. Recognition. That afternoon, the mother cooked the first proper meal in a long time. The smell of food drifted through the village and with it a whisper that spread from mouth to mouth. The man came back, brought her things, said it was for someone who knows how to share. And without meaning to, without planning, without expecting it, she became a story. The kind told around the fire, on clay benches, in the circles of conversation. The story of the woman who gave away her last bowl and received in return more than food. She received confirmation. She received dignity. That night she went to bed with a full belly, but more than that, she slept with her heart warm. And for the first time in a long time she dreamed. She dreamed of a large table full of people, and at that table there was a place for everyone, even for the stranger who once arrived hungry and returned, bringing abundance. Night came as it always did, dark, silent, filled with crickets and thoughts. But this time it wasn't hunger that kept her from sleeping. It was something else. A strange weight that didn't come from her stomach, but from her heart, sitting on the edge of the bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor. She looked at her sleeping daughter and thought, would I have done it if I had known he would come back? The question slipped in through the window like the wind, slowly but sharply. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was simply a thought that grew and spread inside her, like a root searching for water in the dry soil of her conscience. Because until then, everything she had done had come from a pure place, the kind of kindness that doesn't calculate, doesn't weigh, doesn't expect. But now, with a sack of provisions beside her, with the envelope of money tucked away, in the wooden chest where before there had been only rags, she found herself surrounded by a different kind of silence. A silence that asked, did you share out of faith or out of hope for a reward? She tried to push the thought away. She prepared the bed, covered her daughter with a light cloth, lit the lamp with the last sliver of kerosene, but the yellow glow of the flame only made the doubt dance more vividly. Before her eyes, the memories came back in sequence. The man's arrival, his pitiful state, the bowl split in two, the automatic gesture, the child crying, the silence in the house, and then the unexpected return, his clean look, his quiet gratitude, the envelope. It all seemed fair, deserved. But now, in that intimate space between the night and her soul, she wondered if her gesture would have been the same, had she known what was to come. She pressed her hands to her face, squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't want to deceive herself. She didn't want to turn charity into calculation. Because her faith had always been simple, like bread broken in the dark. She didn't know doctrines, didn't read books, didn't make promises out loud. Her faith was the kind born in the silence of pain and grown in the care for others. Then she looked at her daughter, small, thin, but with a serene face, sleeping like someone who trusts, like someone who believes her mother can protect the whole world with her arms. And in that instant she understood. She understood that the purest gesture is not the one that expects a return. It's the one that teaches. She stood up slowly, covered the lamp with a gourd, and stepped out into the yard. The night was cool, the sky heavy with stars. She walked to the most distant clay house in the village, the one where Donna Akoba lived. Another widow, older, more forgotten, who could no longer even harvest cassava on her own. She knocked softly. A weak voice answered, "It's me, I came to leave." A bit of what I received. The old woman opened the door, eyes wide in surprise. "But you don't have anything either." She smiled, a light smile but firm. "Today, Ido. And if God entrusted me with this little, it's because someone else needs it too." She left there a handful of rice, some flour, a small bottle of oil. The old woman cried, speechless. And in those tears she saw herself because she finally knew that the gesture that truly transforms is not the one that stores up, it's the one that multiplies. She returned home in silence, sat once more beside her daughter, and now at last she could sleep. The doubt still existed, as shadows always do, but the answer had come like a soft breeze. Goodness doesn't need certainty, it needs continuity. And when the day broke, the village was still asleep. But in that simple house, two souls rested in peace. One because it had received, the other because it had chosen to keep giving. The sun was already high when he returned to the village, but this time he didn't go to the clay house, nor to the school, nor to the local shop. He went straight to the oldest part of the village where the trees cast shadows over the old houses, and the dirt paths were worn smooth by the footsteps of the elders. There, beneath a crooked cashew tree, lived the ville's elder, a woman with a face lined with wrinkles, small eyes full of light, and whom everyone called Mother. Zu LMA dot. She was not a chief, nor a healer, nor a midwife. Yet she was all of these in one presence. She remembered the births, the weddings, the deaths, the quarrels, and the reconciliations. Her yard was a place of listening, and it was there the man stopped. Mother Zulima was sitting on her wooden stool, as always, mixing herbs in a clay bowl. When she saw him approach, she wasn't surprised. She simply raised her eyes and said, "So, it's time to speak." He sat on the ground at her feet, as boys did when they came seeking advice. He stayed silent for a while as if gathering the right words. Then he spoke, his voice firm but heavy with feeling. "Do you remember Mambo, the founder?" The elder nodded. "My grandfather?" He continued. "I'm Moore's grandson. I grew up hearing stories about him. hearing what he said about justice, humility, and the weight of carrying a name. But as I grew older, I realized that inheritance without compassion becomes a burden, so I chose to disappear. I chose to live among those who have nothing because only then could I know if what I carried was respect or just a surname. She kept listening in silence as if collecting his words with the hands of her soul. I've passed through many homes, many roads. I've seen hunger. I've seen pain. I've seen selfishness. I've seen people pray loudly, but turn their faces when someone falls. I've seen people give while looking down as if they were kings. And I've seen many women left behind as if after their sorrow they had no more worth. Then he told her what had happened that afternoon. The hunger, the shame, the open door, the shared bowl. She didn't ask my name, didn't care where I came from. She only saw that I was in a bad way and treated me like a human being. And there I understood. That was the soul my grandfather said still existed in the villages. The soul that doesn't show up at parties or in speeches, but holds up the world. Mother Zulamar set the bowl aside and took his hands. Her hands were dry, the skin thin, the veins pronounced hands that had blessed generations. You saw what many pretend not to see, and she did what many pretend they would do. He nodded, his eyes wet. I needed to know if people like that still existed, and she does. Then the elder spoke, her calm voice carrying as though through the roots of the village sun. The nobility that hides itself to find truth finds more than truth. It finds itself. They stayed there for a while, unhurried. The cashew tree swayed its leaves as if listening to everything. And in that meeting of generations, a secret was sealed. The man, heir to a name that could open doors, had chosen to test hearts. And there, in that forgotten corner of the village, he had found one that was pure. The heart of a woman who, even in hunger, was greater than her misery. Before leaving, he asked, "Do you think I should tell her who I am?" Mother Zulu Lima smiled. "Time will tell for you. But until then, keep yourself small because those who are too big can't see the ground." And so he left once again in the simple cart without fanfare, without another word. But now the elder knew, and as with all things she knew, she wouldn't guard it out of vanity. She would keep it in her heart until the right time came for the world to know. And that afternoon in the village, the wind blew differently. As if something very old had been confirmed. As if the story the grandparents told about the founder was being continued, not with gold, nor with power, but with a shared ball and a forgotten woman who refused to let her heart grow hard. It was late afternoon when voices began to spread through the village like fire on dry grass. They said the chief was coming, that his cart had already been seen on the stone road, that it wasn't the day for an official visit, nor a council meeting, nor tax collection. This visit was rare, unexpected, different. Women hurried out of their houses, headscarves tied in haste. The men stopped their checkers game under the mango tree. Children ran to the village entrance, eager to see the procession. But there was no procession, only a simple cart drawn by a gentle donkey. And in it the chief himself, old Mabia, a man of few words, whose mere presence could quiet even the market drum. When the cart didn't stop in the central square, nor at the councillor's house, the murmurs grew louder. Where is he going? Did someone die? Is it to settle a land dispute? But soon they saw the cart was headed straight for the poorest part of the village, to the road where the ground was more clay than stone. To the very last house, the cracked clay one where the widow lived, the one who days before had shared a bowl with the stranger. The gossiping neighbor's eyes went wide. She nearly dropped the dishcloth in her hands, the chief at her house, but she's just her. Then everyone saw it. The chief stepped down from the cart, walked to the woman's door, and knocked with his knuckles. He waited for no servant, no announcement, no ceremony. When she opened the door, her face marked by the sun, a faded scarf on her head, her daughter on her hip, he simply said, "I came to thank you." She didn't understand. She stood still as if she'd misheard. The chief continued, "The man you fed. He is blood of the founder of this land. And what you did, without knowing who he was more than charity. It was memory. It was root. Around them, neighbors gathered, some strained to hear, others just watched. Among them were the wealthiest of the village, the store owners, the big plantation holders, the brick house dwellers, whispering to one another, a clay woman receiving the honor of stone. Who's ever heard of such a thing? The chief didn't care. He gestured toward her daughter, who was staring at him suspiciously, and knelt down before the little girl. "You're lucky, little one. Your mother is the kind who saves a village without anyone realizing it." The woman still couldn't speak. She only managed to nod as if asking permission to believe it. The chief stood, and in front of everyone looked at the faces that until now had only known how to point and judge. Sometimes it takes someone who has nothing to remind us of the value we've forgotten. Without another word, he returned to the cart and left, leaving behind a thick silence, heavy with shame for some, heavy with emotion for others. The neighbor who had once mocked the shared bowl now bit her lip, her eyes wet, not with remorse, but with anger. Anger for having judged, anger for having thought herself better. Anger at realizing that the woman she'd called foolish was now honored by the one in power. The woman, for her part, didn't lift her chin. She didn't boast. She didn't call anyone to see. She simply went back inside, hugged her daughter, and said, "When you've known hunger, you recognize another's hunger." The little girl didn't fully understand, but she felt the warmth of that embrace, and that was enough. That day the village learned a lesson without a sermon. They learned that greatness makes no noise, beats no chest, asks for no recognition. It shows itself in small gestures, in a shared bowl, an open door, the choice not to harden in the face of pain. And for the first time in many years, the eyes of the elite turned away from their own wealth toward the poor woman who, even with empty hands, had given them a lesson time would never let them forget. After the chief's visit, the village never quite went back to the way it was. There was something in the air, a subtle change, almost imperceptible, like when rain falls in the night, and the leaves seemed greener the next day. The woman, however, kept her routine unchanged. She still rose early, swept the yard, washed clothes with ash soap, carefully combed her daughter's hair, and cooked the little she had, now with more variety, thanks to the sack of provisions she'd received. But her heart stayed in the same place, rooted in humility. She did not boast, did not flaunt, and didn't answer the sidelong glances of those who had once mocked her and now whispered about her. She knew the wind changes direction, but it's the root that holds the tree. It was on a hot afternoon, when the red dust of the path rose with every step, that the teacher from the community school appeared at her door. Donor Lucia, a woman with a firm voice and calloused hands, was known for her discipline and her fairness. No one dared arrive late to her classes or play at the wrong time. But there, before that clay doorway with its cloth curtain, she arrived with a discreet smile and a small bundle in her hands. "Good afternoon," she said, adjusting the scarf on her forehead. "I came to talk a little if you can have me." The woman motioned for her to come in, wiping the wooden bench with the hem of her dress. Her daughter sat in the corner, drawing in the dirt with a stick. It was a simple scene, yet full of life. The teacher sat down and after a few seconds of respectful silence said, "Your daughter told me something yesterday that I haven't been able to forget. I asked her what she liked to eat most, and do you know what she said? My mother's porridge because it tastes like love." The woman lowered her eyes, moved, but said nothing. The teacher went on. "Many people know how to cook, but few people know how to feed, and feeding my sister is a matter of the soul." She opened the bundle and took out a notebook, a new wooden spoon, and a letter signed by the school council. "We need someone to help in the school kitchen. It's not much, but it's dignified. It's fair, and best of all, it's yours if you want it." The woman put her hand to her mouth in surprise. She hadn't expected it. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even dreamed of it. And yet here it was, life's answer brought by the hands of someone who had seen beyond appearances. "But why me?" she murmured in an almost childlike whisper. "Donna Lucius Miled, because your daughter taught us something no book can teach. Love is learned at home, and when it comes in food, no one forgets it." She accepted the job. The next day, she was already at the school before the first student arrived. She wore the same dress as always, the faded scarf and a new smile, the kind born of gratitude, not vanity. In the kitchen, she didn't just make rice, beans, and porridge. She made welcome. She learned the children's names, their tastes, their family stories. It was as if suddenly the school had gained a new heart, one that beat to the rhythm of the wooden spoon and the smell of frying garlic. The children began asking for seconds, not because they were hungrier, but because they felt something there that was missing elsewhere, affection. And the teachers started noticing that the most distracted students were more focused, lighter, happier. No one could fully explain it, but everyone could feel it. And the woman, she became day by day steadier, not richer, not more powerful, but more whole. Because when life gives you what you never asked for, but secretly needed, the heart settles and gives thanks. She never told anyone she prayed for work, but prayers, even silent ones, have a scent, and heaven, they say, can smell a soul. For weeks, the village seemed to breathe different air. The woman now had steady work. Her daughter came home from school with neatly braided hair and bright eyes. The house was still simple clay walls with the same old cracks, the same warm curtain at the door. But inside there was something new. Dignity, not the kind you hang on a wall, but the kind you carry in your chest. Even so, people's gazes didn't change as quickly as her fate had. The neighbor, the one who once mocked, whispered, and judged, kept her tongue sharp. She spoke in corners, saying the woman now thought too highly of herself for having a job at the school, that she was trying to be more than she was. She made a point of laughing loudly when the woman walked by, or making venomous remarks to other women, as if she needed to shrink someone else to feel big. But time is a master at turning into a mirror. And one day, it also turns luck. It was on a stifling weekend. The sky overcast, the trees leaves still. The neighbor didn't appear at her door, didn't go out for firewood, didn't walk to the well as usual. Days passed and her absence began to draw attention. Achild went to knock at her door to ask for salt as many times she herself had done and came back startled. She's lying down, groaning. Says she can't get up. The news spread and most out of pride only muttered, "She's getting what she deserves." No one went to check. No one brought anything. Who sows venom reaps silence, they said. But when the woman heard, she didn't hesitate. She took the pot from the fire, set aside a portion of soup, grabbed a clean cloth, a bit of medicine she kept for emergencies, and left without a word. She knocked, waited a moment. The neighbor opened the door, trembling, her face sweaty, eyes sunken. When she saw who it was, she almost stepped back. Shame came before gratitude. You came here. The woman smiled without irony, without contempt. I came because pain doesn't choose who deserves it, and neither does forgiveness. She came inside, straightened the mattress, wiped the floor with a damp cloth, helped her sit up. She blew on the soup, fed it to her spoon by spoon. She washed her hands gently, applied the medicine with care. There was no hurry, no judgment. There was care, that old gesture that speaks louder than words. The neighbor cried for the first time, not from physical pain, but from shame. I said so many things about you, said things I'm ashamed of now. You should have turned your face away, left me here alone, but you came. The woman only shook her head. Those who live on resentment dry up inside. I'd rather keep my heart watered. She stayed until late afternoon. She left the soup on the stove, the clean cloth in the corner, and before leaving straightened the bedsheet with care. The neighbor held her hand, and through tears murmured, "Forgive me, not for me, but for everything you heard in silence," she answered only with the squeeze of the hand. Because sometimes true forgiveness doesn't need words. It's enough to be there when no one else is. From that day on, the neighbor saw her differently. Not with admiration, not with adoration, but with humility. She stopped speaking ill of her. She began greeting her with respect. A quiet respect, born not of defeat, but of late recognition. And the woman, she stayed the same, caring for her daughter, cooking at the school, sharing what she had, because she knew there are wounds that aren't healed by punishment, but by mercy. And there are hearts that only open when they're given what they never offered. Compassion. In the village. Many were surprised, but those who knew her essence already understood. She hadn't shared her bowl to be exalted. She had shared because she knew that one day life collects its debts, and when it does, only those with a clean soul can still extend a hand, even to the one who once spat in their plate. The years passed as rivers do without fanfare, yet shaping everything they touched. The girl who once slept in her mother's lap, clinging to emptiness and fed on hope, was now a grown young woman. Her features still held the sweetness of childhood, but in her eyes there was a steadiness, the kind not learned from books, but from quietly watching a mother who had lived more for love than for necessity. She had grown up with the smell of beans cooked with bay leaves and the stories told by the firelight. She had grown up hearing that kindness doesn't need an audience, and those who give without expecting will receive in the way they need most. These phrases, spoken without the intent to teach, had become part of who she was. She studied at the community school where her mother still cooked. She made friends, helped younger children with their homework, and when she could, stayed in the kitchen, listening to the teachers' conversations and laughing at the jokes of pots, boiling as if they had lives of their own. She was respected not for what she owned, but for what she conveyed. An ancient culminator writed in silence. It was on one of those heavy, hot afternoons, with the sun high and dust clinging to the sweat, that destiny decided to turn its wheel again. The young woman was walking along the dirt path from the school to the fields, where she would pick up some vegetables. She walked distractedly, thinking about the next day's tasks, when she spotted a figure in the distance. An elderly man lay at the roadside, one foot twisted, his face covered in dust. His head was turned toward the ground, his arms weak, and no one else around. She approached slowly, knelt down and called, "Sir, can you hear me? Do you need help?" The old man murmured something barely audible, asking for water. She had none to spare, only a little for herself. But she took off her headscarf, dampened it with the last drops from her bottle, and wiped his face. Then with effort she helped him sit in the shade of a tree. She took the bread she had brought for her own snack and placed it in his hands. "Here it's simple, but it's from the heart." He ate slowly without haste. And when he finished, he looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold old memories. You're the daughter of the porridge woman, aren't you? Surprised? She frowned. Yes, I am. How do you know? Hesmeled is one who has stumbled upon something thought lost. Because I knew your mother too, and because only someone who learned from her would have done what you just did. He was the brother of the former mayor of a neighboring town. A man who, though never having lived in the village, still kept ties to its past. He was passing through, visiting the remains of his father's house when he tripped and fell. And there, on the ground, he had been helped by someone who didn't know who he was. Someone who didn't ask for a name, a title, or a reason, only reached out a hand. This village has a story the world needs to hear, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And you are its continuation. She helped him to his feet and took him to the school where he received care and a place to rest. And that night, when she returned home and told her mother what had happened, there was no celebration, no exaltation, only a silence full of meaning. Her mother looked at her with tearful eyes and said, "You did what was right, just as it's always been done here." Her inheritance was not made of land, nor of houses, nor of new dresses. It was made of values passed from hand to hand like the old mortar that still leaned in the corner of the kitchen. It was made of gestures, of memory, of lived faith. And the young woman, now fully grown, walked this path without even noticing. Because when the root is strong, the fruit does not stray. And when the gesture is pure, it repeats itself, even decades later, even in another place, even with different words. It was harvest time. The drums had been sounding since early morning. The gourds were filled with dried corn, and the makeshift tables under the trees were bright with banana leaves and cloths embroidered by the women of the village. Children ran between the adults, pots boiled in open-air kitchens, and the air smelled of abundance and celebration. That day the village breathed memory. It was the moment to give thanks to the earth, to the seasons, and to the work of human hands. As in every year the elders were called to speak, they recalled the first plantings, the hard years, the rains that took too long to come, and the days when cassava was all there was to fight off hunger. They told stories, laughed, and clapped. But when night fell and the bonfire was lit in the center of the square, one of the village councilmen asked for silence and called out a name that made many look at each other. Tonight we want to hear from someone who doesn't speak much but has much to say. Someone who never asked for a place but earned it by what she did when no one was watching. And so she was called the porridge woman, the widow, the school cook, the mother of the girl who had become an example. She walked slowly to the center of the circle, wearing her worn dress, her headscarf tied at the nape, and her eyes lowered. She didn't like the spotlight, but she understood the weight of this moment. And out of respect she spoke. "I'm not a woman of speeches," she began, her voice steady and calm. "But today, they asked me to tell a story. The problem is, I don't know how to tell pretty stories. I only know how to tell what I've lived." The bonfire crackled and the people listened, in silence. "There was a time when my daughter and I had only one bowl, and in that bowl a bit of porridge. That was all we had. And that day a man came to the door hungry. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he'd come from. I only saw his hunger and I shared." She paused. Her eyes swept across the attentive faces around her. Many there remembered. Others pretended not to. That night, I went to bed with an empty stomach, but with a warm soul, because I knew that if my daughter learned to share, even when she had nothing, she would never be alone in the world. Another pause. Now her eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. Later, life turned. The man came back, brought provisions, brought an answer, brought peace. The neighbors mocked me, but I kept going. Because those who plant goodness don't wait for applause. They wait for fruit. And the fruit came. At that moment, her daughter, now a young woman, stepped forward and took her mother's hand. They stood there together, side by side, like root and stem, like beginning and continuation. The woman took a deep breath, then concluded, "Today they asked me for a story. But I have only one. The story of a bowl that did not fill the stomach, but saved my soul. Because it was then I understood that sharing is a way of multiplying, that giving the last piece is sometimes the first step toward receiving what you truly need, and that the miracle does not live in the return. It lives in the gesture made in silence." When she finished, there were no shouts, no hurried applause. For a few seconds, silence reigned, the kind that comes only when the heart hears, more than the ears. And then, as if they understood what had not been spoken, the whole village rose, everyone standing, clapping slowly with reverence, not out of pity, but out of gratitude. In that moment, she became not just a woman of the village, but a symbol, a point of reference, an example. The bonfire kept burning as if wanting to etch the scene into eternity, and in the sky, the stars seemed closer. as if they too wanted to listen, as if they too had come to witness what happens when a simple soul chooses to love, even when the world has yet to recognize it. After that night, with the bonfire still crackling in the village square, and the echo of applause silencing the voices that had once mocked, many began to wonder who exactly was the man who had arrived hungry, and later returned with full hands. Curiosity grew like invisible roots beneath the earth, slowly but inevitably. But the woman never asked. She never had, because to her the man's name didn't matter. What mattered was what she saw in his eyes when he returned. What mattered was what he left in her hands. What mattered was the lesson born in the space between the gesture and the reward. And perhaps that is why she was the only one who wasn't surprised when the truth came out. It was Mother Zulu Lamar, the elder, who revealed it one late afternoon, seated on her bench beneath the cashew tree, surrounded by children and women who sought her words as if they were seeds. She told the story without fanfare. That man was the grandson of this village's founder, blood of old lineage. He inherited land, houses, accounts, power, but he chose to walk among bare feet, sleep under thatched roofs, eat from bowls the world had forgotten. He wanted to see with his own eyes what money cannot show. He wanted to test the soul of those who call themselves good. When no one is watching, the news spread with the same speed as gossip, but with a different weight. There was no scandal in it, only wonder, reverence, recognition. Many who had once scorned the woman's gesture now looked at her with late respect. The same ones who had laughed when she shared her last porridge now whispered. She gave to the air as if he were anyone, and that's exactly what she had done. Because to her, everyone was someone. Everyone deserved to eat. Everyone deserved compassion, not for what they had, but for what they felt. The man, now known to all, did not return to the village with riches or promises. He returned with silence and simplicity. He kept living among the humble, passing by small houses, hearing great stories, and from time to time he would sit near the school just to smell the lunch she was cooking. He didn't need to eat. He needed to remember. The woman, for her part, never changed. She kept sharing with the neighbor, with the students, with whoever came to her door, because she had learned over time that the real miracle was not the man's visit, nor what he brought, nor the envelope. The miracle had already happened before when she chose to share, when she chose to give, when she expected nothing in return. Her daughter grew up and followed the same path, not one made of clay, but of faith. And the old bowl now kept in a corner of the house is the only object no one touches. Not because it's a relic, but because it's a symbol of everything that matters. Because in the end, it was that shared bowl that changed the fate of a home, of a child, of an entire village. It was that silent choice that taught the world there is greatness in not hesitating before another's pain. That there is living faith in giving even when you have little. That there is eternity in a gesture that to the eyes of the world seemed too small to matter. And today when someone asks about her, the woman who shared her last meal, no one calls her poor thing anymore. They call her example root honor dot. She never went hungry again, but she kept sharing all she had. Because those who have known absence never grow used to selfishness, and because she understood that the good done in silence is the one that shouts the loudest in the heart of God, even when no one else hears. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one.